Hello everyone, we are Group 4 and today we are going to discuss about forced labor. Here are my list of my group mates.
According to the ILO Forced Labor Convention in 1930, forced or compulsory labor is all work or service which is exacted from any person under the threats of a penalty and for which the person has not offered himself or herself voluntarily. In a simple word, we can say a person can be considered to be in the forced labor when they are not willing to do the work and there is a threat if they refuse to do the work. In Malaysia, we have Section 90B of the Employment Act 1955 state that employers cannot threaten, deceive, or force employees to work. This section protects employees from exploitation by the employers by encouraging the employees to have the freedom over their work. In addition, Section 374 of the Penal Code provides the punishment for anyone who unlawfully compels another person to a labor against their will. Although we have various laws and regulations that have been introduced, forced labor still remain as a prevalent issue in Malaysia. The case that involve exploitations of the workers, unpaid wage, and excessive working hours especially happen among the migrant workers. For instance, there were 3,800 Nepali migrant workers in Malaysia that in 2003 to 2017, and the major reason is being cardiac arrest and heart attack due to the poor working condition. Therefore, addressing the forced labor is very important to protect the workers' safety, dignity, and human rights, while also improving the Malaysia's reputation and development.
Hello everyone, I'm Katie and I'll talk about literature review. So forced labor consists of three primary forms, such as state-imposed forced labor imposed by human traffickers for sexual exploitation, as well as forced labor imposed by private agents for labor exploitation. Firstly, let us talk about state-imposed forced labor. It is often presented as national services. For example, the Ministry of North Korea often forces citizens to do state-run jobs, in which they are being given no real wages and punishment for absence. Next, I'll talk about forced labor imposed by human traffickers for sexual exploitation. For example, in Thailand, people are lured by false promises, leading them to do sex work unintentionally and involuntarily. Thirdly, let's talk about forced labor imposed by private agents for labor exploitation. For example, in Qatar, people often faces passport confiscation and wages withholding situations. Next, I'll talk about core indicators of forced labor. There are five core indicators such as debt bondage, passport retention, unlawful wage deductions, excessive working hours, and exploitative equipment flow. Lastly, I'll talk about the specific causes of forced labor. For example, migration status, social-economic disadvantage, as well as lack of support and guidance by experienced family members and close ones. Next, I'll talk about the second part of the literature review. Firstly is the World Uyghur Congress v National Crime Agency by Smith in 2024. For example, Uyghurs, Kazakhs, Greek, and other Muslim minorities were poor victims of forced labor in Xinjiang, China. Next, I'll talk about the public prosecutor v Murugan anak lelaki Murugan in 2010. Murugan withheld Muntik's identity documents to restrict her freedom of movement. Later, he forced her to work without giving any financial compensation and abused her physically and psychologically by punishing her through starvation and isolation. This led to her ultimate demise. As a punishment, he was being imprisoned for 40 years at maximum, as his act had clashed with Section 302 of the Penal Code.
First, the Employment Act 1955 protect worker rights and impose penalty on employer involved in forced labor. However, enforcement remained challenging, particularly for immigrant workers. Similarly happened for Section 374 on the Penal Code that ban forced labor and provide penalty for those who force individuals to work against their will. In addition, Petition 2007 served as Malaysia's main law against human trafficking and forced labor, with the several punishment for the offender. Despite this, victims often face language barrier and may not fully understand their right. Furthermore, Industry Relations Act 1967 protect employees from unfair dismissal and allow them to seek retirement. However, some workers stay reluctant to report abuse due to fear of losing their job. Finally, the Immigration Act 1959 penalised employers who hire undocumented workers, while Article 6 of the Federal Constitution provides the highest protection by prohibiting slavery and forced labour in Malaysia.
I'll be continuing on the topic of forced labour as a current employment issue in Malaysia and the effectiveness of Malaysian employment laws in addressing it. Forced labour is a serious employment issue, especially among migrant workers in sectors such as manufacturing, construction, plantations, agriculture, and domestic services. It occurs when workers cannot freely leave or refuse their jobs because of threats, deception, debt, or restrictions on their movement. Many migrant workers arrive in Malaysia after paying high recruitment fees, leaving them in debt and making them more vulnerable to exploitation. As a result, they often continue working in poor conditions simply to repay what they owe. To combat this problem, Malaysia has introduced several legal protections, especially the Employment Act 1955 sets minimum standards for employment and includes Section 90B, which make it an offence for employers to threaten, deceive or force employees to work against their will. In addition, Section 374 of the Penal Code prohibits compelling any person to perform labour without their consent. This law reflects the government's commitment to protecting workers and promoting fair labour practices. However, challenges remain in enforcing these laws effectively. Many migrant workers are unaware of their legal rights or are afraid to report abuse because of language barriers, fear of losing their job, or concerns about deportation. Labour authorities may also face resource and manpower limitations, making it difficult to inspect every workplace and ensure full compliances. In conclusion, while Malaysia has established important laws to address this forced labour, stronger enforcement and greater awareness among workers and increased employer accountability are essential to ensure that every worker is treated fairly and with dignity.
Next, I will explain the challenge and impact of forced labour in Malaysia. Firstly, despite various law and policy, forced labour remains a serious issue in Malaysia. One major challenge is the forced labour often occurs in hidden or remote workplaces such as plantation, factories, construction sites, and private homes. This makes it difficult for authorities to detect and take action against employers who exploit workers. Another challenge is the vulnerability of migrant workers. Many of them depend on their employers for housing, work permits, and income. Because of this dependency, workers may be afraid to report abuse due to fear of losing their job or being deported. Language barrier and lack of knowledge about labor rights also make it harder for them to seek help. In addition, some migrant workers pay high recruitment fee before coming to Malaysia. This can lead to debt bondage, where workers continue working in unfair conditions to repay their debts. Limited manpower and resources for labour inspection also make enforcement made challenging. Moving on their impact, forced labour can seriously affect workers' physically and mental well-being. Victims often face long working hours, low wages, and unsafe working conditions, which may lead to stress, anxiety, and health problems. Forced labour also affect workers' family by increasing poverty and limiting access to education and healthcare. Furthermore, it damages Malaysia's international reputation and may reduce investor confidence. Therefore, eliminating forced labour is important to protect human rights, promote fair employment practice, and support sustainability economic development. Thank you.
To reduce forced labour in Malaysia, we propose 4 key recommendations. First, the government should strengthen legal enforcement by increasing workplace inspections and ensuring labour laws are strictly enforced. Second, a dedicated forced labour task force should be established to improve cooperation among authorities and provide safe reporting channels for victims. Third, the migrant worker rescuement system should be reformed to prevent excessive recruitment fees and unintentional rescuement practice. Finally, worker awareness should be increasing through booking video education programs and better access to complaint machines Together, those measures can better protect workers and reduce the risk of forced labor in Malaysia. That's all for recommendations. Thank you.